A single misplaced word was all it took to destroy her, or so he thought. It slipped from his tongue in Mandarin, quiet enough to seem harmless, cruel enough to echo through every corner of the room. But in that moment, the black waitress he dismissed would become the woman who changed his empire. At 28, Michelle's life looked nothing like the one she had planned. She should have been in Beijing or Shanghai, translating contracts for multinational firms, maybe lecturing on linguistic diplomacy. Instead, she balanced wine bottles and memorized orders for people who would never learn her name. Her master's degree in East Asian Studies from Columbia hung crooked in her Bronx apartment, gathering dust beside the overdue bills. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could unravel the politics of Mandarin honorifics, but couldn't escape American debt. The golden lantern glittered like a temple to money. The walls shimmered with gold leaf, the air perfumed with truffle and quiet arrogance. Every table gleamed beneath candlelight, and every waiter moved with choreographed precision. Silence was part of the service, the kind that disguised exhaustion as grace. Michelle had learned to glide between tables like smoke, unseen and necessary. It wasn't the worst job she'd had. The pay was steady, the clientele generous when drunk, and the gossip occasionally entertaining. But nights like this made her chest tighten. Nights when power itself seemed to dine here. If this story moved you, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Your engagement helps this story reach more people. Let's make it go viral together. Word had spread among the staff hours earlier. Richard Anthony had booked the private jade room. The name traveled through the kitchen like a chill. Billionaire, hedge fund wolf, the man who could buy a failing company before breakfast and sell it by lunch. No one wanted to serve him. He was famous for perfectionism and for making people regret being human. Michelle had seen his face before, square-jawed, camera-ready, the kind of expression that made magazine covers call men like him visionary. He was in town to host a Chinese investment delegation rumored to control billions in infrastructure funds. The Golden Lantern had prepared for weeks, special menus, imported porcelain, even a red silk backdrop embroidered with gold cranes for good fortune. When a manager called Michelle into his office that afternoon, she already knew. "Tubman," he said, straightening his tie as if it could stiffen his courage. "You're fluent in Mandarin, right?" "Yes, sir." "Good. You'll handle the Anthony table. But listen carefully, he's particular." "How particular?" He exhaled through his nose. "No small talk. No eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Just keep the glasses full and the plates perfect." Michelle nodded, forcing a neutral smile. "Understood." As she turned to leave, he added softly, "And, Michelle, don't try to impress him. Men like that don't like being surprised." She almost laughed. If only he knew how little she wanted to impress anyone. By 7, the restaurant had hushed itself for his arrival. 2 assistants entered first, scanning the room as though danger lurked beneath the tablecloths. Then came Richard Anthony. Tall, tailored, immaculate. He didn't walk so much as command space. Conversation dimmed in his wake. His expression never broke from its practiced neutrality. He didn't look at the staff. He looked through them. Michelle guided the delegation to the private room, the polished doors carved with golden dragons. Inside, a round table waited beneath a suspended lantern painted with phoenix feathers. As the guests took their seats, she poured the first round of Shaoxing wine, careful, steady, invisible. From the corner of her eye, she watched Anthony switch effortlessly between charm and calculation. He greeted the Chinese investors with rehearsed warmth, dropping phrases of Mandarin he had probably memorized hours earlier. The men nodded politely, their smiles tight. To the untrained ear, everything sounded harmonious. To Michelle, each misused tone was a fingernail on glass. He didn't understand what he was saying, not really. He was performing fluency, not practicing it. Still, she kept her expression smooth. It wasn't her place to correct power. Her place was to refill glasses, anticipate needs, and vanish before gratitude was required. That was the rule. That was survival. The evening flowed like silk. Expensive, fragile, deceptive. Michelle moved between tables, her mind half in Mandarin, half in the rhythm of service. She imagined herself in another life, behind a translator's desk, negotiating trade agreements instead of navigating egos. When she caught her reflection in the polished silver tray, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The uniform, the quiet obedience, the practiced smile, they had become her armor. Yet beneath them, brilliance still burned, restless and unseen. Outside the private room, laughter rose, brittle and practiced. Michelle steadied the wine bottle and took a breath. Whatever happened next, she reminded herself, she was here for one reason, to keep her dignity intact, even in silence. She pushed open the door, the soft light spilling across her face. The world beyond the tray felt distant, dreamlike. Somewhere in the space between servitude and pride, she whispered to herself the truth she couldn't afford to forget. Invisible, always invisible, but not for long. Inside the private suite, conversation hummed in low, expensive tones. Crystal glasses clinked softly, the air scented with saffron and roasted duck. The Chinese delegation sat at the oval table, their posture impeccable, their eyes sharp and assessing. At the head sat Richard Antony, tall, immaculate, his cufflinks catching the chandelier's glow like small declarations of wealth. Michelle moved around the room like a shadow, every gesture precise, silent. She'd served hundreds of men like him before, self-assured, admired, insulated from consequence. But this one had presence, a kind of cold gravity that drew attention the way fire draws air. He was charming, in his way. Between courses, he switched from English to Mandarin, tossing out practiced phrases as though language were an accessory. "Zhong是women zui zhong yao de huoban," he said with a smile. "China is our most important partner." The guests nodded politely. Michelle could almost hear their thoughts behind their controlled smiles. His tones were passable, but his rhythm, off. He spoke Mandarin like someone balancing glass on a wire, careful but soulless. She poured tea, her hands steady, while her mind translated every word he missed, every nuance he flattened. The ache of unfulfilled potential pressed against her ribs. She had written her master's thesis on how language mirrors power. Tonight, she was serving the proof. The moment came quietly. Michelle leaned to refill Richard's glass of Shaoxing wine. One single drop slipped over the rim, dark as garnet, landing on his immaculate white cuff. Barely visible, but enough. He froze mid-sentence. The room stilled. Even the music from the corridor seemed to dim. Michelle instinctively reached for a napkin. "Apologies, sir." He didn't look at her. His lips curved into something like a smile. Then, in clear Mandarin, pitched just low enough for his guests to hear, he muttered, "Zhezhongren lian shui do, bu hui dao." These people can't even pour water right. The words hit her chest like a slap. His tone, so casual, so confident, cut deeper than the insult itself. The delegation exchanged brief, uncomfortable glances. One man looked down his plate. No one spoke. Richard assumed she didn't understand. Why would he? The help rarely did. Michelle straightened slowly, her pulse steadying with each breath. The world seemed to sharpen. The glint of crystal, the faint hum of air conditioning, the weight of 1,000 unsaid words pressing against her tongue. When she finally spoke, her Mandarin flowed out smooth as silk. Perhaps, sir, you should learn how to be a gentleman before judging others. The effect was immediate. Every head at the table turned. The air crackled with disbelief. One of the younger delegates stifled a laugh. Another whispered something in astonishment. Chairman Zhao, the eldest among them, hid a smile behind his teacup. Richard's hand froze midair, his expression flickering between shock and wounded pride. Michelle didn't flinch. Her eyes met his with calm defiance, the kind that doesn't demand respect but commands it. He recovered his composure, barely. "Impressive," he said finally, his voice tight. "Didn't realize the Golden Lantern hired linguists." "They don't," she said evenly. "Some of us bring our own education." Silence followed, long and electric. For the first time all evening, Richard Anthony had nothing to say. When Michelle stepped back toward the wall, the power in the room had shifted. The woman he dismissed as invisible now held every gaze. And though her hands still held the tray, it was Richard who suddenly seemed to be carrying the weight. Sure. Silence after Michelle's words hung thick in the air, fragile and electric. No one moved. The clink of silverware, the hum of quiet conversation from the main dining room, all of it faded beneath the weight of what she'd just done. Her heart pounded, but her face remained still, professional. She stepped back from the table, the tray steady in her hands. Then came the sound she dreaded, the sharp, quick click of polished shoes. "Michelle," hissed a voice behind her. It was Raymond, the floor manager, his face a storm barely contained by a forced smile. "A word. Now." He pulled her aside, past the ornate screen dividing the private suite from the service corridor. His breath came fast, his tone low and panicked. "What the hell was that? Do you have any idea who you just insulted?" Michelle met his fury with eerie calm. "I didn't insult anyone. I responded." "You responded?" Raymond's eyes widened. "You spoke back, in front of billionaires, in another language. Do you know what that looks like?" "It looks like I asked for respect," she said quietly. His mouth opened, then shut again. The kitchen staff glanced over from the prep area, pretending to work while straining to hear. "Apologize," he demanded. "Right now. Go back in there, bow your head, and say you're sorry. Maybe we can fix this." Michelle's jaw tightened. "Respect isn't optional, Raymond. It isn't something you beg for. It's earned or lost." For a long moment, he stared at her, his anger giving way to something like pity. "You don't understand how this world works," he said softly. "People like him, people like them, they don't forgive." "I'm not asking them to," she replied. From the doorway, Richard's voice cut through the tension. "Raymond." Both turned. He stood there, tall and composed, expression unreadable. "It's fine," he said smoothly. "The matter's over." But it wasn't. The air in the room never recovered. The rest of the dinner played out in uneasy silence, his guests speaking politely but avoiding his eyes. The Chinese delegates, though courteous, no longer seemed charmed. And every time Michelle passed the table, she could feel Richard's gaze flicker toward her, cool, assessing, as if trying to reconcile the woman who'd poured his wine with the one who'd silenced him. By midnight, the last guests were gone. Raymond approached her at the staff lockers, eyes down. "I'm sorry, Michelle," he said, voice heavy. "Orders from above." She nodded. She'd known it was coming. The words still stung like a blade's slow turn. She changed out of her uniform, folded it neatly, and left it on the bench. As she stepped into the cold night, the city's lights shimmered against puddles on the pavement, each reflection trembling like the future she'd just lost. Her subway ride home was a blur. Neon lights, tired faces, the low rattle of metal against track. In her small Bronx apartment, she sat at the edge of her bed, the day replaying in flashes. The red drop on his cuff, the insult, the silence. Her voice. She could have apologized, could have swallowed the sting, bowed and survived. But as she stared out the cracked window at the city that never looked back, she whispered to herself, steady and sure, "Some truths are worth the price." The next day bled into gray. Rain traced crooked lines down her window, whispering against the glass as if echoing her thoughts. Michelle sat on the edge of her narrow bed, still in the clothes she'd slept in, staring at the single letter from the Golden Lantern folded neatly on the nightstand. Termination of employment. She'd read it 3 times already, each word heavier than the last. Her savings, barely enough for rent. Her pride, still raw from the night before. She had stood up for herself, for dignity, for truth, and the cost was now staring her in the face. Her phone buzzed, slicing through the quiet. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." A crisp female voice replied, formal and composed. "Good afternoon. Is this Miss Michelle Tubman?" "Yes." "Who's calling?" "This is Helen Ward, assistant to Mr. Richard Anthony." Michelle sat straighter, the name hitting her like a cold gust of air. "Mr. Anthony?" "Yes. He requests your presence at his office this afternoon." A car will arrive at your address in 15 minutes. Michelle blinked. I think you have the wrong person. No, Miss Tubman. Mr. Anthony was quite specific. The line clicked off. For a moment, she simply stared at the phone, her mind spinning through possibilities. Retaliation, legal threats, public humiliation. The image of his face at the restaurant flashed back, controlled, unreadable. Whatever this was, it couldn't be good. She considered not going. But curiosity burned hotter than fear. What did a man like Richard Anthony want with her now? 15 minutes later, a black town car pulled up in front of her building, its engine humming softly beneath the drizzle. The driver stepped out, wordless, and opened the door for her. As the car pulled away, the Bronx faded behind her, brick and graffiti giving way to steel and glass. The city passed in shifting reflections, subway grates steaming, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers, lives moving fast and oblivious. Michelle watched her own reflection in the tinted window, the ghost of a waitress vanishing with every block. The city skyline loomed ahead, sharp and gleaming. Passing from invisibility into confrontation, she thought. It felt like crossing an invisible border between the world of those who served and those who commanded. When the car stopped in front of Anthony Tower, she understood power in a new way. The building rose into the clouds, all steel and mirror, the kind of place that made pedestrians lower their eyes as they walked past. The lobby gleamed like a cathedral of ambition. Polished marble floors, bronze accents, and silence so precise it felt engineered. The receptionist looked up as she entered. Miss Tubman, yes. Mr. Anthony is expecting you. 73rd floor. The elevator ride felt endless. The soft hum of machinery, the steady climb, her pulse counting each passing floor. When the doors opened, she stepped into a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray sprawl of Manhattan. At the far end, a glass door bore his name, Richard Anthony, Anthony Capital. She knocked once. Come in. He stood by the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the skyline. The light caught the edge of his jaw, the same precise confidence she'd seen at the restaurant. Only quieter now. For a long moment, he didn't turn. You caused quite a stir last night, he said finally. Michelle stayed silent. He turned then, his eyes meeting hers with that same impossible stillness. You embarrassed me, he said evenly. Then, after a pause, but you also impressed me. The words landed like a chord struck too softly to be dismissed. Michelle exhaled slowly. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. The office was made of glass and silence. From his 73rd floor, Manhattan looked like another world. Cars threading through the streets like veins of light, the river glinting beneath the gray sky. Everything here was distance and dominance. Michelle stood by the door, feeling out of place against the gleaming expanse of marble and steel. Richard Anthony gestured toward a chair across from his desk. Sit, she did carefully. Her palms were still damp, though her voice stayed level. You said you were impressed, she began. I'm assuming that wasn't a compliment. He studied her, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been amusement. You're direct. Good. Richard moved to his desk, pressing a button that darkened the glass behind him, cutting out the skyline's glare. Let's skip the part where we pretend last night didn't happen, he said. You embarrass me in front of men who control billions. That's not something I forget. Michelle's jaw tightened. Then why am I here? Because you also did something no one else has managed in months. He leaned forward. You earned their respect. The Chinese delegation. Chairman Zhao hasn't taken my calls all morning, but his assistant called you. Wanted to know who the woman was who spoke Mandarin like a Beijing scholar. Michelle blinked. He called me. He did, Richard said, voice low. Because he doesn't trust me anymore. My team of translators, my advisors, they're losing him. They don't understand the culture, the tone, the subtle dance that keeps those negotiations alive. He sat back, folding his hands. You do. Her heartbeat quickened, a mix of disbelief and something sharper, possibility. You want me to translate for you? She asked carefully. I want you to save $1 billion deal, he replied. And to do that, I need more than translation. I need comprehension, nuance, the kind of insight that doesn't come from a textbook. He opened a drawer, pulled out a slim envelope, and slid it across the desk. A check. $1 million. Her throat tightened. What is this? Your signing bonus, Richard said. If you agree to work for me, as my cultural and linguistic advisor. We leave for Beijing tomorrow. Michelle stared at the paper, her mind spinning. $1 million. Enough to erase her debt, change her life. Enough to silence every rejection letter that had told her she was overqualified to serve, underqualified to lead. But this was the same man who'd humiliated her 24 hours earlier. The same face she'd looked in the eye and corrected. Why me? She asked softly. Richard's gaze didn't waver. Because you understand the language of power, and you're not afraid to use it. Silence filled the room again, heavy but alive. Michelle's reflection shimmered faintly in the black glass wall behind him, a waitress no longer. She reached for the check, fingers trembling slightly. I'm not doing this for the money, she said. Then why? He asked. She met his eyes. To prove that respect is my real currency. Held faintly. Tomorrow, Beijing. The city rose in a haze of silver and red. From her hotel window, Michelle watched Beijing unfold beneath the dawn. The rhythmic flow of bicycles, the gleam of new towers beside ancient roofs. It felt like stepping into the heart of every textbook she'd studied, only louder, faster, alive. Her first day moved like choreography. Black sedans, mirrored conference rooms, dinners where every word carried a second meaning. It wasn't just business here, it was performance. Every bow, every pause, every sip of tea played its part in a centuries-old dialogue of honor and face. Richard moved through it like a man used to winning, but now his confidence had an edge of humility. He asked questions. He listened. Sometimes, between meetings, he'd glance at her for confirmation, and Michelle would nod or correct him quietly. A subtle tilt of tone, a phrase refined. She noticed the shift. The man who once saw her as invisible now looked to her as his compass. That night, during a dinner with a ministry delegation, she met him, Dr. Liao. He was everything a scholar should be. Elegant, articulate, precise. His Mandarin flowed like a river, every tone effortless. Richard greeted him with the respect reserved for men whose intellects shape nations. Dr. Liao has been advising cross-border negotiations for 15 years, Chairman Zhao said proudly. Few understand both cultures as he does. Michelle smiled politely, but something in the man's eyes, a gleam of amusement, perhaps, set her instincts on edge. As the evening unfolded, she listened closely. Liao translated Richard's presentation flawlessly, almost. There were moments, barely perceptible, when his word choice veered. Phrases like partnership became oversight. Mutual growth shifted toward management control. Tiny inflections, almost invisible to an untrained ear, that changed the entire power dynamic of the conversation. Richard didn't notice. The Chinese delegates did, and their smiles, once warm, cooled by degrees. Michelle kept her expression still. Perhaps she was imagining it. Perhaps it was nothing. But by the second meeting, the pattern returned. The same small twists. The same quiet sabotage dressed as formality. At lunch, she caught Richard studying her. You look like you're decoding something, he said. She managed a faint smile. Just listening. Should I be worried? Not yet. That night, back in her hotel room, she couldn't sleep. The glow of the city bled through the curtains, restless as her thoughts. If she was wrong, if she accused a respected interpreter without proof, she could destroy both their careers. A foreign advisor embarrassing a government translator could spark disaster. And yet, she couldn't ignore what she'd heard. She opened her journal, the one she always carried but rarely wrote in, and drew a slow breath before putting pen to paper. Meaning isn't just words, it's intention. The ink bled slightly, the letters soft in the dim light. Outside, Beijing pulsed with quiet power, and Michelle realized that language, her oldest friend, had just become a battlefield. Of course, building quiet tension toward Michelle's fateful decision. The air in the boardroom was sharp with anticipation. A semicircle of lacquered wood separated two worlds, Richard and his team on one side, Chairman Zhao and the Chinese delegation on the other. Beyond the glass wall, Beijing shimmered beneath a pale winter sun, serene and indifferent. Michelle sat slightly behind Richard, her notepad untouched, her pen motionless. Every word, every syllable in Mandarin or English ran through her mind like code. This was the final session. The billion-dollar partnership depended on it. Dr. Liao stood between them, polished, calm, the perfect interpreter. His voice, low and cultured, filled the space as he translated Richard's opening statement about collaboration, long-term trust, and mutual respect. But Michelle caught it immediately, the subtle fracture. Richard said, "We believe in collaboration." Liao said, which didn't mean collaboration. It meant we lead the cooperation, a phrase dripping with dominance, the very thing the delegation had feared. Michelle's pulse quickened. Her fingers gripped the edge of her chair. Once could be an accident, twice coincidence. But now, for the third time, she heard it again. Another phrase twisted just enough to turn goodwill into arrogance. Liao smiled faintly after each translation, as though savoring a private joke. Chairman Zhao's face had cooled into politeness, the kind of politeness that precedes withdrawal. Richard didn't know. He couldn't. The conversation sounded perfect in English. Michelle leaned slightly forward. She wanted to speak, to correct the phrasing, to stop the slow unraveling of trust happening before her eyes. But to interrupt here, in this setting, to challenge an interpreter of Liao's stature in front of Zhao, could be catastrophic. She'd be branded impulsive, disrespectful, even insubordinate. And Richard's deal would die anyway, tainted by scandal. Yet silence was its own betrayal. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. The room seemed to close in, voices softening, time stretching thin. Across the table, Liao continued smoothly, spinning Richard's next sentence into something colder, transactional. She saw Zhao's advisor lean in, whispering to him, brows knitting. The shift in energy was unmistakable, trust slipping away, one mistranslated phrase at a time. Michelle's breath caught. She thought of the Bronx apartment she'd left behind, of the humiliation in the Golden Lantern, of every moment she'd swallowed her worth to stay invisible. Not again. She straightened, hand steady despite the storm inside. Her eyes met Liao's for a fleeting second, and in that glance she saw it. The arrogance, the certainty that she wouldn't dare. Her pen rolled off the table and clattered to the floor. The sound cracked through the silence. Every head turned. Michelle rose slowly, bowing her head in apology. But when she lifted it again, her expression had changed. Calm, composed, decided. Not yet words, not yet defiance, just the quiet certainty of what must come next. Under her breath, barely audible, she whispered in Mandarin, a promise to herself, not a threat to him. Truth doesn't fear translation. The next morning, the air in the conference suite felt heavier, charged, watchful. The city sprawled beyond the glass, a maze of glass and ambition. Inside, silence pressed like humidity before storm. Richard sat at the head of the long table, his posture sharp but eyes uncertain. He didn't know what had shifted the day before, but he could sense it, an invisible fault line running beneath the negotiations. Dr. Liao stood beside the Chinese delegation, immaculate as ever, his silver tie pin catching the light. He wore the smile of a man already certain of victory. Michelle entered quietly, carrying her notes and a calmness that didn't reach her eyes. She had been awake all night, replaying every word, every tonal shift. Truth was a dangerous thing, she'd learned, but silence was deadlier. Chairman Zhao began the session, thanking both sides for their patience and commitment to mutual understanding. His tone was polite but distant. One wrong move now, and the deal would collapse. Richard began his statement. This time, Michelle listened not to him, but to Liao. When Richard said, "We seek to build bridges, not walls," Liao translated it as, "We expect to lead the project and manage the partnership directly." That was it, the final straw. Michelle inhaled slowly, then spoke. not interrupting, but weaving herself into the flow of conversation like a thread tightening the fabric. "Dr. Liao," she said pleasantly in Mandarin, "I've always admired your work, especially your paper on intentional mistranslation in high-level Western negotiations." Liao froze. A tiny flicker crossed his face, too fast for most to notice, but Michelle saw it. Chairman Zhao tilted his head. "What paper?" The room stilled. Michelle smiled faintly. "Oh," she said, her tone perfectly mild. "Perhaps I'm misunderstood. It's just that Dr. Liao's phrasing reminded me of that very paper. The one discussing how small linguistic shifts can undermine trust between business partners." Liao's jaw tightened. "Miss Tubman," he said in clipped English, "I think you are mistaken." But Zhao's eyes had already narrowed. He turned toward his assistant, murmuring in rapid Mandarin. The assistant typed something on his tablet, then looked up. "Chairman," he said, "there is such a paper, written under Dr. Liao's name, published 3 years ago." A murmur rippled through the room. Liao's composure cracked. "This is irrelevant," he said sharply. "We are here to discuss." "Relevance," Michelle interrupted softly, "is everything when trust is at stake." Zhao stood. "Enough." His voice sliced the air clean. "Dr. Liao, please step outside." 2 security officers appeared, quiet but firm. Liao sputtered a protest, but Zhao's expression silenced him. Within moments, the door shut behind the disgraced interpreter. The room exhaled as if it had been holding its breath. Richard turned toward Michelle, his expression unreadable, part awe, part disbelief. "Would you care to continue?" Zhao asked her. Michelle nodded, switching seamlessly into Mandarin. Her voice was calm, confident, precise. She retranslated Richard's original statements word for word, every phrase balanced between respect and strength. When she finished, Zhao smiled for the first time. "Now," he said, "we understand each other." The room broke into gentle applause. Not loud, not showy, but genuine. Richard didn't join at first. He just looked at her, the woman he'd once dismissed as invisible, and realized she'd just saved not only his deal, but his entire reputation. Michelle bowed slightly. Her hands no longer trembled. Respect restored. Balance reclaimed. The ink dried in silence. The contract lay open on the long table, its embossed pages shimmering under the morning light that poured through the glass walls of the Beijing conference suite. Chairman Zhao's pen rested beside his hand, the signature of agreement between East and West finally complete. Richard Anthony exhaled, the first true breath he'd taken in days. Around him, the delegation exchanged measured congratulations, handshakes that meant billions, nods that meant history. But Michelle stood apart, her heart quiet, her gaze steady on the skyline. She wasn't thinking of money or headlines. She was thinking of the journey, from the Golden Lantern's hushed dining room to this moment of global consequence. When the last papers were sealed and the translators dismissed, Zhao turned to her. "Miss Tubman," he said in Mandarin, his tone warm now, "your understanding goes beyond language. It honors intention. That is rare." She bowed slightly. "Thank you, Chairman." Sometimes meaning hides in tone, not words. He smiled. Then today, meaning was found. On the flight back to New York, clouds stretched endlessly beneath them, soft, weightless, unjudging. Richard sat across the aisle, silent for much of the trip. The arrogance that once defined him seemed replaced by something quieter, reflection. Halfway across the Pacific, he finally spoke. "You turned my humiliation into salvation." Michelle looked up, surprised. His tone wasn't grand or performative. It was raw. "I thought I understood power," he continued. "But what you did, that wasn't power. That was dignity." For the first time, she saw not the billionaire who'd insulted her, but a man learning to see differently. He reached into his briefcase, pulling out a slim folder. Inside was a new contract, shorter, more personal. "I don't want you as my employee," he said. "I want you as my partner. Head of Antony Global East. Build it with me." Michelle hesitated. The title shimmered on the page: power, recognition, redemption. But she learned something about power. It only mattered if it lifted others, too. One condition, she said softly. He raised a brow. A scholarship. For black linguists. For women in language studies. People like me. The ones who have the mind, but not the means. For a moment, the cabin hummed with the quiet of understanding. Then Richard nodded. Done. He extended his hand across the aisle. She took it, firm and sure. Not as a servant, not even as an employee, but as an equal. By the time the plane began its descent, Manhattan's lights glittered through the window. The city that had once made her invisible, now waiting to witness her return. Michelle smiled faintly, watching the skyline rise to meet them. A single word had destroyed her once. Now her words built empires. If this story captivates you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of karma and triumph. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.